everyone, welcome, benvenuti. Today I'll be talking to you about tomato products. I'm Mark, we're in my kitchen, and this is a can of San Marzano tomatoes. In the book I write about San Marzano tomatoes in the recipes. On the blog I write about San Marzano tomatoes in the recipes. So what's so special about San Marzano tomatoes? San Marzano tomatoes come from the area just south of Mount Vesuvius, from the town San Marzano. Originally, the seeds came from Peru and were brought from the New World over into Italy. I believe, if I have the story correctly, that the king or emperor or ruler of Peru gave them as a gift to the king or queen of Naples. They were planted in San Marzano, and because the soil there is volcanic ash, it's very rich, they did really well. What's special about San Marzano tomatoes is that they are meaty tomatoes. They don't have a lot of juice in them, a lot of liquid or a lot of seeds, but they have a lot of flesh, which is really great for cooking and really great for sauce. They make a really great sauce. Sometimes San Marzanos are hard to find in America. Sometimes you'll see San Marzano style. Sometimes you'll see Italian plum tomatoes, but unless it says San Marzano and it has the DOP certification on it, they're not really San Marzano plum tomatoes. So these are a little more expensive here in the United States than a regular plum tomato. They're also, like I said, a little harder to find. If you can't find these, that doesn't mean you should not make the recipe. It just means grab a can of American plum tomatoes. These will work just as fine. They're not as meaty. They have a lot more juice and a lot more liquid in them, so you may have to cook the sauce down a little longer so you'll get the same consistency as you would with a San Marzano tomato. Let me open up both cans and I'll show you the difference between San Marzano and their kind of American cousins. Here we go. Let's start with the San Marzano tomatoes. You can see they're kind of thick. Oh, it's going to splatter all over me. I'm going to get covered in it. That's okay. It's worth it. So, San Marzano tomatoes. Here you go, and here is one. Oh, it's kind of slippery. It's still alive. There you go. That's a San Marzano plum tomato. And in a recipe, I always tell you to take these and crush them in a bowl. You do just that. Pour it in here into the bowl, and then you just take your hand and you would crush it. Be careful not to squirt seeds all over you and juice, because that's what I'll do. I don't know if you can see this necessarily, but if you can see how kind of thick this sauce is inside the can, that's the San Marzano. So I'm just splashing this all over the place. Next, let's take a look at its American cousin, the plum tomato. And here those go. I'll try not to splatter them all over. Can you see how, in a way, these are more watery? They have a little more liquid in them, and they're just not quite as saucy as the Italian tomatoes. Here is an American plum tomato. It's a little more round than its Italian cousin, and you would just crush these up the same way. Like I said, once again, be careful when you crush them because they will squirt all over the place. I brought the camera in closer so I could really show you specifically why I prefer the San Marzano as opposed to the American tomatoes. I've just dumped the cans in as I showed you earlier, and let me just show you just the natural sauce. I know I'm using my hands, but I think it shows you better than using a spoon. So here's just the natural tomato sauce or juice that's in the can of the San Marzanos opposed to the American. If you can see, this one, the American plum tomatoes, are just thinner. They're more liquidy. They have a little more water in them. These will make just as good a sauce as this. You're just going to have to cook this one down longer. And for my money, this looks so much more appetizing than this does. So that was all about whole peeled tomatoes, San Marzano tomatoes. And now we're moving on to what is probably a bigger question for most people. What are strained tomatoes? Strained tomatoes are, in a way, it's tomato sauce. What it is, they take tomatoes, they run it through a food mill to remove the seed and the skins, and you're just left with the sauce. Tomato sauce, it says it on the can, tomato sauce, has actually been cooked and spiced. Usually it has salt and pepper, and sometimes it has oregano, sometimes it has basil in it, sometimes it has thyme. It usually has oregano. That's tomato sauce. It's already been prepared for you. Strained tomatoes are just the tomatoes with no preparation. Sometimes it'll have a little bit of salt put into it, but that's all. My favorite strained tomatoes to use are Pomi brand. It says right here, strained tomatoes on the label. What's great about these is that you can open them up, you cut this in, and you pour as much as you want out. I just put this package back into a plastic, closed resealable bag and throw it into the fridge, and then I have it there for the next time I want to use it. I really like this brand, and I'm not getting any money. That's just what I feel. I really like the Pomi tomatoes. Sometimes you can't find Pomi tomatoes, strained tomatoes, but sometimes you can find strained tomatoes in a jar. I like these a lot too because you open the jar, pour out what you want, close the jar, put it back in the fridge. So these are really easy. Strained tomatoes, like I said, are kind of hard sometimes to find in America. I like it because they're Italian tomatoes that have been strained. If you can't find these, don't worry. You can always reach for tomato puree, which is kind of the American version of strained tomatoes. Works just as well. Again, I think these have a little more flavor, but that doesn't mean that these are great and this is junk. It's not. Tomato puree is absolutely all right to use. So if you can't find strained tomatoes, use tomato puree. Please cook. Bring your family to the table. Change a life one meal at a time. That's my mantra and I believe it. Don't stop making a recipe or don't keep yourself from making a recipe if you can't find the exact product or brand. It's not about that. So before we move on to tomato paste, I thought I would show you what the strained tomatoes, the Pomi brand, look like. It's just tomato sauce, except remember that it's not tomato sauce yet. It's just strained tomatoes. What would make this a tomato sauce is once it's been seasoned and cooked. So if you go to the grocery store and you find tomato sauce, remember that's already been cooked and seasoned. Strained tomatoes are just the tomatoes that have been put through a food mill and there's no seasoning in them yet, so it's not a sauce. There you go. Tomato paste. I know most people know what tomato paste is, but what I like to use is tomato paste in a tube. I know usually you can find it in the can. What happens is usually most recipes call for a tablespoon of tomato paste. So you end up opening the can, taking out a tablespoon, and then you have this leftover tomato paste that you may not use for a week or so. It's going to go bad by then, or I think it is. I hate keeping it stored in the refrigerator, so I end up throwing it away. So it ends up being a waste. In the tube, however, what's great about that is you can open it up, you puncture this end of it, and now I can squeeze out just what I want. I can squeeze out a tablespoon of tomato paste, put the lid back on, keep it in my fridge. I keep pointing over there because that's where my fridge is. Put it in the fridge, and now it'll last until the next time I need tomato paste, which is great. So tomato paste in the tube is a little more expensive, but you won't be throwing away the canned tomato paste to buy another can to use a tablespoon to throw that away, on and on and on. So for me, this tomato paste is actually more cost effective because I use actually what I purchase. I don't throw any of it away. There you go, Tomato 101. Canned whole and peeled San Marzano tomatoes, strained tomatoes, and tomato paste. Please leave me your feedback, leave me your comments. Let's start a dialogue. Remember, it's so important to cook, bring your family to the table, and change a life one meal at a time. And now I have to figure out how I'm going to do that with all of this tomato. Oh, you know what? I think I know. I'll just use Beyond the Pasta. Go to beyondthepasta.com and there leave me comments. And you can also find information about the book. I think I may make spaghetti and meatballs tonight. Well, there's a meatball recipe in here and a sauce recipe, Nona sauce. Would be perfect. Benvenuti, not benvenuti, that means welcome. I meant to say ciao, arrivederci. Sono pazzo, mi dispiace, I'm crazy. Ciao, 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 ciao.